Right now, the Middle East is on the edge of something no one fully understands yet. In the next few minutes, we are going to cover 5 major breaking news stories that came out of the region on April 8, 2026. First, the United States and Iran reach a last-minute ceasefire agreement brokered by Pakistan. Second, Iran suspends oil tanker traffic through the Strait of Hormuz after Israeli strikes in Lebanon. Third, the U.S. sends a high-level negotiating team to Pakistan as Iran signals willingness to hand over enriched uranium. Fourth, Trump threatens 50% tariffs on any country supplying weapons to Iran. And fifth, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Kuwait, Qatar, and Bahrain all report missile and drone attacks just hours after the ceasefire was announced. Stay with us. Every one of these stories connects to the others, and together they paint a picture of a region that is simultaneously pulling back from the brink and sliding toward it at the same time. Less than 24 hours ago, Donald Trump posted on social media that, and these were his words, "An entire civilization will die tonight if Iran did not reach an agreement with the United States." That is the level of escalation this situation had reached. We are not talking about diplomatic tension. We are talking about a sitting American president publicly announcing the imminent destruction of a nation-state. And then, just hours later, something shifted. Pakistan stepped in as mediator. Iran sent a 10-point proposal. Trump read it and called it a viable basis for negotiation. A 2-week ceasefire was established. The Tasnim news agency, which is closely linked to Iran's powerful Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, confirmed the deal was in place under what it described as specific conditions. The central condition, the one Trump made non-negotiable, was the immediate, full, and safe reopening of the Strait of Hormuz. Here is why that matters so much. The Strait of Hormuz is a narrow waterway between Iran and Oman, and it is arguably the most strategically important choke point on the planet. Approximately 20% of all global oil and liquefied natural gas transported by sea passes through it. When Iran closes or restricts that strait, it does not just hurt the countries in the Gulf. It sends shockwaves through global energy markets, hits supply chains on every continent, and gives Tehran an enormous amount of leverage over the entire world economy. Trump understood this. His ceasefire was not just about stopping bombs from falling. It was about forcing Iran to release its grip on one of the most consequential pieces of geography on Earth. Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi confirmed on social media that if attacks against Iran were halted, Iranian armed forces would cease their retaliatory strikes against targets across the Middle East. But the language he used was careful and conditional. He said safe passage through the Strait of Hormuz would be possible during the 2-week period through coordination with Iranian armed forces and, critically, taking into account what he called technical limitations. That phrase is doing a lot of work. Experts immediately flagged it as a signal that Iran is not restoring free navigation in the international legal sense. It is offering a managed, conditional, and temporary access regime, one where Tehran retains the ability to regulate, restrict, or weaponize the strait at any moment. Ann Dreesen of the American Jewish Committee's Center for a New Middle East told RFE HRL that what is actually in place is not a return to international norms, but a system of controlled access where Iran still holds the switch. That is not a resolution. That is a pause with Iran's finger on the button. And then came the news that threw everything into uncertainty again. Despite the ceasefire being less than a day old, Iran suspended tanker traffic through the Strait of Hormuz. The reason given was Israel's continued military operations against Hezbollah targets in Lebanon. This is where the ceasefire begins to show its fragility. Pakistan's Prime Minister, Shehbaz Sharif, had stated publicly that Lebanon was included in the ceasefire framework. Hours later, Trump contradicted that directly, saying the ceasefire did not apply to Lebanon. Israel backed up Trump's position, and with Lebanon explicitly excluded, Iran used continued Israeli strikes there as justification to restrict passage through the strait. Iran's ambassador to the UN in Geneva, Ali Bahraini, was blunt about what all of this means. He said that even the arrangements for the Strait of Hormuz are temporary, and that Tehran is approaching any future negotiations with Washington with extreme caution, noting that pre-war nuclear talks produced no results. The ceasefire is real, but it is sitting on a foundation of sand. On the diplomatic front, the White House moved quickly. Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt announced that Trump is sending a senior negotiating team to Pakistan for the first round of formal talks, scheduled for Saturday. The team will be led by Vice President J.D. Vance alongside Special Envoy Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner. What makes this announcement significant is not just who is going, but what Leavitt revealed about Iran's signals. She told reporters that Iran has indicated it would be willing to hand over its stockpile of enriched uranium. If you follow this issue closely, you understand how significant that claim is. Enriched uranium is the core of Iran's nuclear leverage. Handing it over would represent a dramatic rollback of years of Iranian nuclear development. Leavitt called this a red line for Trump, one he would not walk back from. She confirmed that yes, Iran had given signals it was prepared to do this. She provided no further details. The question now is whether that signal becomes a commitment and whether any commitment becomes verifiable action. On the economic pressure side of this confrontation, Trump escalated further on Tuesday. He announced that any country supplying military weapons to Iran would immediately face 50% tariffs on all goods sold to the United States, with no exceptions and no exemptions. He posted this directly, signed with his initials. He did not name specific countries. He did not clarify whether Russia would be included, despite reports that Russian drones were transferred to Iran as recently as March. He also did not specify the legal authority under which he would impose such tariffs, which is not a minor detail. The Supreme Court struck down his use of the International Emergency Economic Powers Act earlier this year, creating real legal uncertainty around his tariff authority. China and Russia both blocked a U.S.-backed UN resolution to reopen the strait, and both denied recent arms transfers to Iran while acknowledging historical support for Iran's military capabilities. Meanwhile, U.S. imports from Russia actually increased 26% to $3.8 billion in 2025, driven by palladium, fertilizers, and enriched uranium for nuclear reactors, creating a remarkable irony in Washington's position. And then came the most alarming news of the day. Just hours after the ceasefire was announced, multiple Gulf states came under attack. The United Arab Emirates reported that its air defenses were actively intercepting ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, and drones coming from Iran. Operations at the Habshan gas complex in Abu Dhabi were temporarily suspended after debris from intercepted projectiles caused a fire. 2 Emirati citizens and 1 Indian national were injured. Kuwait reported intercepting 28 drones launched by Iran starting at 8 in the morning local time, with some targeting vital oil facilities and power plants in the south of the country. The Kuwaiti Interior Ministry confirmed serious material damage to Kuwait Petroleum Corporation facilities, 3 power stations, and water desalination plants. Fires broke out at several of the targeted sites. Bahrain reported drone attacks that left 2 people with minor injuries and damaged homes near its energy infrastructure. Qatar said it was targeted by 7 ballistic missiles and multiple drones, all of which it said were successfully intercepted. Saudi Arabia announced it had shot down 9 drones in the hours following the ceasefire announcement. Iranian state television confirmed the attacks, framing them as retaliation for what it described as Israeli bombardment of Iranian oil facilities earlier on Wednesday. This is the central contradiction of everything happening right now. A ceasefire is technically in effect between the United States and Iran, but Iran launched attacks against 5 Gulf Arab states on the very same day that ceasefire was announced. The states being hit are not parties to the ceasefire. They are American partners and allies. They host American military assets, and they are sitting directly in the line of Iranian fire even as U.S. and Iranian negotiators prepare to sit down in Pakistan. What is actually happening here is a conflict that has refused to stay inside the lines drawn by any agreement. The ceasefire between Washington and Tehran is real in the sense that both sides have acknowledged it and both sides have a short-term interest in not fighting each other directly right now. But the broader regional war has its own momentum. Israel is still striking Hezbollah in Lebanon. Iran is still striking Gulf Arab infrastructure in retaliation. The Strait of Hormuz is partially open, partially closed, and entirely under Iranian discretionary control. Enriched uranium may or may not be on the table. Tariff threats are flying at unnamed countries. And a negotiating team is on its way to Islamabad to try to turn a 2-week pause into something that resembles a lasting agreement. The next 2 weeks will tell us whether what happened on April 8, 2026, was the beginning of a genuine diplomatic off-ramp or simply the latest temporary interruption in a conflict that has been building for decades. Every signal right now is pointing in 2 directions at once. The ceasefire is holding, and the war is still happening. Both of those things are true at the same time. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Do you think this ceasefire leads anywhere real, or is this just buying time before the next escalation? We want to hear what you think.